The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty frontier town of Copper Creek in the summer of 1883. Samuel Sam Hartwell rode his weathered horse through the main street, his eyes scanning the unusual commotion ahead. A crowd had gathered near the old oak tree that served as the town's grim reminder of frontier justice. Sam had been wandering the desert territories for 3 years now, ever since losing his family to an Apache raid that he later discovered was orchestrated by corrupt officials seeking to claim valuable mining land. As he approached the gathering, Sam's blood ran cold at what he witnessed. 3 young Apache women, barely out of their teens, stood with nooses around their necks on makeshift platforms beneath the hanging tree. Their traditional clothing was torn and dirty, evidence of rough treatment. The eldest couldn't have been more than 20, with defiant dark eyes that refused to show fear despite her predicament. The other 2 were clearly sisters, their resemblance unmistakable as they held hands while facing their accusers. Sheriff Ben Morrison, a large man with a permanent scowl and a reputation for harsh dealings with the local tribes, was reading charges from a crumpled paper. His voice boomed across the crowd as he accused the women of murdering 3 white settlers and stealing cattle from the Mackenzie Ranch. The crowd murmured their agreement, some calling for immediate justice. Sam noticed several men he didn't recognize among the townspeople, well-dressed strangers who seemed oddly eager for the execution to proceed. Something about the scene troubled Sam deeply. In his years wandering the desert, he had learned to read people and situations with keen accuracy. The Apache women showed no guilt or shame, only anger and frustration. Their eyes held the look of the wrongly accused, the expression Sam had seen in mirrors too many times during his own troubles with corrupt officials. The youngest of the 3 was trying to speak, but her words in Apache were ignored by the hostile crowd. Sam dismounted and pushed through the gathering, his tall frame and weathered appearance commanding respect from the locals who recognized him as a capable frontiersman. He had helped the town before, tracking rustlers and providing protection during dangerous times. When he reached the front of the crowd, he called out to Sheriff Morrison, demanding to know the evidence against these women. The sheriff's face darkened at the interruption, but he couldn't ignore Sam's reputation in the community. Morrison explained that the 3 Apache women had been found near the Mackenzie Ranch with blood on their clothing and stolen cattle in their possession. Witnesses claimed to have seen them fleeing the scene where 3 settlers lay dead. The evidence seemed overwhelming, and frontier justice demanded swift action. However, Sam's experienced eye caught details that others missed. The blood on the women's clothing appeared old and dried, not fresh from a recent attack. Their horses showed no signs of hard riding, and their demeanor suggested confusion rather than guilt. The crowd grew restless as Sam asked more questions, with some demanding that the hanging proceed without further delay. The mysterious, well-dressed strangers began moving closer to the front, their hands resting near their weapons. Sam realized that these women might be pawns in a larger scheme, possibly connected to the same corruption that had destroyed his own family. The Apache had been increasingly pressured to give up valuable land, and false accusations were a common tactic used by unscrupulous men seeking to eliminate tribal claims. As the sheriff prepared to carry out the execution, Sam made a decision that would change everything. He stepped forward and formally requested a delay, citing territorial law that allowed for proper investigation of capital crimes. His knowledge of legal procedures surprised Morrison, who had assumed the drifter was just another uneducated wanderer. The crowd began to divide, with some supporting Sam's call for proper justice while others demanded immediate revenge for the settlers' deaths. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as Sam found himself standing between the accused women and a mob hungry for blood. He could see fear beginning to creep into the eyes of the youngest Apache woman, while the eldest maintained her proud bearing despite the circumstances. The well-dressed strangers were whispering among themselves, clearly displeased with this unexpected development. Sam realized he had stumbled into something much bigger than a simple case of frontier justice. Sheriff Morrison reluctantly agreed to a 24-hour delay, but warned that without compelling evidence of the women's innocence, the hanging would proceed as planned. The crowd began to disperse, though many cast angry glances at Sam for interfering with what they saw as justified retribution. As the townspeople wandered away, Sam noticed the mysterious strangers lingering near the saloon. Their attention focused on him, rather than the accused women who were being led to the town jail. That evening, as Sam sat in the local boarding house planning his next move, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The Apache women's fate now rested in his hands, and he had less than a day to uncover the truth behind the accusations. Something about the whole situation reminded him too much of his own family's tragedy, when corrupt officials had manipulated evidence to justify their land grab. He was determined not to let history repeat itself, but he knew that challenging the established narrative would put his own life in danger. Sam began his investigation before dawn, riding out to the Mackenzie ranch where the alleged murders had taken place. The morning air was crisp and clear, perfect conditions for reading tracks and examining evidence that might have been overlooked in the rush to judgment. As he approached the ranch, he noticed that the bodies had already been buried, which struck him as unusually hasty for a frontier community that typically displayed victims as evidence during trials. The ranch foreman, a grizzled man named Pete Williams, was reluctant to discuss the incident, but eventually agreed to show Sam the scene. Williams led him to a small cabin where the three settlers had been staying while working cattle drives. The building showed signs of a violent struggle, with overturned furniture and dark stains on the wooden floor. However, Sam's trained eye noticed inconsistencies that suggested the scene might have been staged after the fact. Most telling was the pattern of blood spatter on the walls, which didn't match the story of a surprise attack by the Apache women. Sam had seen enough violence in his years on the frontier to recognize that these stains suggested the victims had been killed elsewhere and brought to the cabin. Additionally, the tracks around the building were confusing and overlapping, as if multiple groups had visited the scene at different times. Williams grew increasingly nervous as Sam asked detailed questions about the timeline of events. When Sam requested to examine the stolen cattle that had allegedly been found with the Apache women, Williams claimed they had already been returned to the main herd and couldn't be identified. This raised another red flag, as branded cattle were typically kept separate until ownership could be verified. Sam began to suspect that Williams was either involved in the deception or being pressured by others to maintain the false narrative. The foreman's answers became more evasive with each question. Riding back toward town, Sam detoured to visit the Apache reservation where the three women had lived. The tribal elder, a wise man named Grey Wolf, was initially suspicious of the white stranger, but agreed to speak when Sam demonstrated respect for Apache customs. Grey Wolf revealed that the three women had been missing for 2 days before being found at the ranch, and their families had been searching desperately for them. This timeline didn't match the official story of them fleeing immediately after committing murder. Grey Wolf also shared crucial information about the women's characters and recent activities. The eldest, named Morningstar, was known for her peaceful nature and work as a healer within the tribe. The two sisters, Singing Bird and Little Fox, were barely 18 and had never shown any violent tendencies. More importantly, all three had been working together to gather medicinal plants in the mountains during the time the murders supposedly occurred. Several tribe members could vouch for seeing them in areas far from the Mackenzie ranch. The tribal elders' most shocking revelation concerned recent pressure from outside forces trying to convince the Apache to abandon their reservation land. Well-dressed white men had been visiting tribal leaders, offering money for mineral rights and threatening consequences if the tribe refused to negotiate. Grey Wolf described these men in terms that matched the mysterious strangers Sam had seen in town, suggesting a coordinated effort to remove Apache claims to valuable territory. As Sam prepared to leave the reservation, Grey Wolf pulled him aside with a warning. The elder had heard rumors that someone was planning to eliminate any witnesses who might contradict the official story about the murders. This included not only the three accused women but potentially anyone who investigated too deeply into the truth. Sam realized that his own life was now in danger, but he was more determined than ever to expose the conspiracy before innocent blood was shed. Returning to Copper Creek as the sun began to set, Sam noticed increased activity around the jail where the Apache women were being held. Additional guards had been posted, and the mysterious strangers were now openly conferring with Sheriff Morrison. The scene had the feel of men preparing for action, and Sam suspected they might attempt to carry out the executions ahead of schedule to prevent further investigation. Sam managed to speak briefly with the jail guard, an honest man named Tom Bradley, who had served in the Territorial Army. Bradley confided that he had overheard conversations suggesting the hanging might be moved up to that very night, using the excuse of preventing a potential Apache raid to rescue the women. The guard was troubled by the irregularities he had witnessed but felt powerless to act against his superior's orders. The pieces of the conspiracy were beginning to fall into place in Sam's mind. The three Apache women had likely stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to see, possibly the real murders being committed, or evidence of the land grab scheme. They had been kidnapped and framed to eliminate them as witnesses, while simultaneously providing justification for increased pressure on the Apache tribe. The rushed timeline was designed to prevent anyone from examining the evidence too closely. With night falling and time running out, Sam realized he needed help to save the women and expose the truth. However, most of the townspeople were either involved in the conspiracy or too intimidated to act against it. He would have to rely on his own skills and the few honest individuals he could trust. The mysterious strangers had made their move, and now Sam would have to make his. The next few hours would determine whether justice would prevail or whether another tragic chapter would be written in the violent history of the frontier. Sam knew he needed concrete evidence to convince the townspeople of the women's innocence. Under cover of darkness, he returned to the Mackenzie ranch with determination to uncover what had really happened. This time, he brought tools for a more thorough investigation, including a lantern and magnifying glass that had served him well in previous tracking situations. The ranch was eerily quiet, with only the sound of cattle lowing in the distance and the whisper of desert wind through the buildings. Behind the cabin where the murders allegedly occurred, Sam discovered something that had been missed in the initial investigation. Partially buried beneath a pile of old hay and debris were the personal belongings of the three real murder victims. Among these items were letters and documents that painted a very different picture of recent events. The murdered men hadn't been simple ranch hands as claimed, but rather territorial surveyors who had been mapping mineral deposits throughout the region. The most damning piece of evidence was a survey report detailing valuable copper and silver deposits located directly beneath Apache reservation land. The document bore the seal of the territorial government and contained detailed maps showing proposed mining claims. Margin notes in different handwriting suggested that certain individuals were planning to acquire these rights through questionable means. Sam recognized the significance immediately, as mineral rights had been the source of numerous conflicts between settlers and native tribes. As Sam studied the documents by lantern light, he heard the sound of approaching horses. Quickly extinguishing his light and concealing himself behind a water trough, he watched as three riders approached the cabin. In the moonlight, he recognized Sheriff Morrison and two of the well-dressed strangers from town. Their conversation confirmed his worst fears about the conspiracy. The men discussed moving up the execution timeline and eliminating any potential witnesses, including Sam himself if he continued to interfere. The leader of the strangers, a man with a distinctive scar across his left cheek, was clearly in charge of the operation. He spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to giving orders and having them followed without question. Sam learned that this man, identified as Colonel Marcus Thorne, was representing a consortium of Eastern investors seeking to acquire mineral rights throughout the territory. The Apache reservation represented the largest untapped source of wealth in the region. Morrison expressed concern about Sam's investigation, but Thorne dismissed the threat with cold calculation. The colonel explained that Sam would meet with an unfortunate accident during an attempt to rescue the Apache women, solving multiple problems simultaneously. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, removing both the witnesses and the investigator while maintaining the appearance of frontier justice. Thorne's casual discussion of murder revealed the depths of his moral corruption. After the conspirators departed, Sam carefully gathered the evidence and prepared for the most dangerous part of his mission. He needed to reach the Apache women and get them to safety before the planned execution, but the jail was heavily guarded, and any direct assault would likely result in bloodshed. Instead, he decided to use his knowledge of the town's layout and his skills as a tracker to find an alternative approach. Sam remembered that the jail had been built over an old mine shaft that connected to a network of tunnels beneath the town. These passages had been used during the early mining days but were now largely forgotten by most residents. If he could access the tunnel system, he might be able to reach the women without confronting the guards directly. The plan was risky, but it offered the best chance of success without unnecessary violence. Moving carefully through the darkened streets, Sam made his way to the abandoned mine entrance on the outskirts of town. The wooden supports creaked ominously as he descended into the underground passages, guided only by the flickering light of a small candle. The air was stale and thick with dust, making breathing difficult as he navigated the maze of tunnels. Several wrong turns and dead ends tested his patience, but eventually he found the passage that led toward the jail. The sound of voices above indicated that he was directly beneath the cell block where the Apache women were being held. Using a small knife, Sam carefully worked at the loose floorboards until he created an opening large enough to communicate with the prisoners. The women were initially startled by his appearance but quickly understood that he was there to help. Morningstar, the eldest, spoke enough English to serve as translator for the others. Through whispered conversation, Sam learned additional details that supported his theory about the conspiracy. The women had indeed witnessed the real murders while gathering medicinal plants near the ranch. They had seen Colonel Thorne and his men kill the surveyors when the victims refused to falsify their mineral assessment reports. The women had been captured while trying to escape and had been held prisoner for 2 days before being transported to the ranch and framed for the murders. Morningstar also revealed that Thorne had tried to force them to sign documents transferring Apache mineral rights to his consortium. When they refused, he had decided to eliminate them as witnesses while using their deaths to pressure the tribe into compliance. The plan was more comprehensive than Sam had initially realized, involving not just the cover-up of murder but also the systematic theft of Native American land rights. Through intimidation and violence, time was running short as Sam prepared to help the women escape. Through the tunnel system, above them, he could hear increased activity as guards changed shifts and preparations began for the early execution. The conspirators were moving ahead of schedule, which meant Sam had only hours to get the women to safety and expose the truth to the townspeople. The most dangerous part of their escape was about to begin. The escape through the underground tunnels proved more challenging than Sam had anticipated. The Apache women, weakened by days of captivity and poor treatment, struggled to navigate the narrow passages and loose rock formations. Morningstar, despite her own exhaustion, helped guide her younger companions through the darkness while Sam led the way with his flickering candle. Every sound from above sent waves of tension through the group as they feared discovery by the guards. Halfway through their underground journey, disaster nearly struck when a section of rotted timber gave way, sending rocks tumbling down and creating a loud crash that echoed through the tunnels. The women froze in terror as they heard shouts from the jail above, followed by the sound of running feet. Guards were clearly investigating the disturbance, and it would only be a matter of time before they discovered the hole in the cell floor. Sam urged the group forward with desperate urgency, knowing that their window of escape was rapidly closing. They emerged from the tunnel system at the old mine entrance, just as the first rays of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. The women gasped gratefully at the fresh air, but Sam knew they couldn't rest yet. He could already hear the sounds of a search party organizing in town, with dogs barking and horses being saddled. Colonel Thorne would spare no effort to recapture the escaped prisoners, as their testimony could destroy his carefully constructed conspiracy and expose him as a murderer. Sam's plan was to reach the Apache reservation, where the women would be safe among their own people, but the journey across open desert would leave them vulnerable to pursuit. He had hidden supplies and fresh horses at a waterhole several miles from town, but getting there without being seen would require all of his frontier skills. The women trusted him completely, having no other choice, and followed his lead as they began their dangerous trek across the harsh landscape. The pursuit began in earnest as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Sam could see dust clouds on the horizon indicating multiple search parties spreading out across the territory. Thorne had clearly mobilized significant resources, including both his own men and corrupted local officials. The colonel couldn't afford to let the women reach safety, as their testimony would not only expose the murders but also reveal the broader conspiracy to steal Apache mineral rights through false accusations and intimidation, using every trick he had learned during his years as a desert wanderer. Sam led the group through hidden canyons and rocky terrain that would make tracking difficult. He chose routes that avoided open spaces where they might be spotted from a distance, even though this made their journey longer and more arduous. The Apache women, despite their ordeal, showed remarkable endurance and determination, understanding that their lives depended on reaching their tribal lands. At the hidden waterhole, Sam's preparations proved invaluable. Fresh horses, food, and water allowed the group to rest briefly, while he studied the pursuit patterns through his spyglass. What he saw was deeply troubling, as the search parties were being guided by someone with intimate knowledge of Apache territory and hiding places. Sam realized that Thorne had recruited tribal members who had been corrupted by money or threats, turning Apache against Apache in his quest to eliminate the witnesses. The most immediate threat came from a group of 6 riders led by Sheriff Morrison himself, approaching rapidly from the south. These men were well armed and mounted on fresh horses, giving them significant advantages in any direct confrontation. Sam knew that fighting was a last resort, as he was outnumbered and needed to protect 3 exhausted women. Instead, he chose to use deception and misdirection to throw off their pursuers. Sam created false trails leading in multiple directions while the real escape party took a hidden route through a narrow canyon known only to experienced desert travelers. This bought them precious time but also revealed the sophisticated nature of Thorne's operation. The colonel had clearly been planning this conspiracy for months, gathering intelligence about Apache territory and identifying potential escape routes. The murder of the surveyors had simply accelerated his timeline. As they approached Apache territory, the women began to show signs of hope for the first time since their ordeal began. Morningstar explained that her uncle was a respected war chief who would protect them and ensure their testimony reached territorial authorities. However, Sam worried that even the reservation might not be safe from Thorne's reach, as the colonel had already demonstrated his willingness to corrupt officials and eliminate obstacles to his plans. The final approach to the reservation required crossing an open valley where they would be visible from great distances. Sam waited until late afternoon when the sun would be in the eyes of any pursuers approaching from the east. As they made their desperate dash across the exposed terrain, gunshots rang out behind them as Morrison's search party spotted their movement and gave chase. The race for safety had become a literal race for their lives. Just as it seemed the pursuers might overtake them, Apache warriors appeared on the ridgeline ahead, having been alerted by smoke signals of the approaching danger. A brief but intense firefight erupted as the tribal warriors engaged Morrison's men, forcing the corrupt sheriff to retreat rather than risk an open battle with the Apache tribe. The 3 women collapsed with relief as they reached the safety of their people, but Sam knew that the larger battle was just beginning. Colonel Thorne would not give up easily, and the evidence of his conspiracy needed to reach honest territorial authorities before he could eliminate all witnesses and cover his tracks. The Apache women were safe for the moment, but the fight for justice was far from over. Sam realized he would need to take the battle directly to Thorne and his conspirators, if he hoped to prevent future tragedies and expose the corruption that had claimed so many innocent lives. With the Apache women safely among their people, Sam faced his most dangerous challenge yet. He needed to gather irrefutable evidence of Colonel Thorne's conspiracy and present it to territorial authorities before the colonel could eliminate all traces of his crimes. The documents he had recovered from the ranch were valuable, but he needed testimony from other witnesses and proof of the broader corruption that had infected local law enforcement and government officials. Sam's first stop was the town of Silver Mesa, 50 miles north of Copper Creek, where the territorial judge was known to be an honest man named Judge William Harrison. However, getting there alive would be extremely difficult as Thorne's men were actively hunting for him throughout the region. The colonel had put a substantial bounty on Sam's head, claiming he was an Apache sympathizer who had helped murderers escape justice. This false narrative was spreading quickly among settlers who feared Indian uprisings. The journey to Silver Mesa required careful planning and several risky detours. Sam traveled mostly at night, using his knowledge of desert water sources and hidden trails to avoid the main roads where bounty hunters were likely to be waiting. During the day, he hid in caves and rocky overhangs, always listening for the sound of approaching riders. The stress of constant vigilance was exhausting, but he knew that stopping meant certain death at the hands of Thorne's hired killers. Along the way, Sam encountered other travelers who shared disturbing news about events in Copper Creek. Thorne had convinced the townspeople that the Apache escape represented an imminent threat to all white settlers in the region. The colonel was using fear and prejudice to rally support for military action against the reservation, claiming that the tribe was harboring dangerous criminals. This manipulation of public opinion was part of his larger strategy to justify seizing Apache lands through force. At a remote trading post, Sam met a grizzled prospector named Jake Murphy, who had valuable information about Thorne's operation. Murphy had been approached by the colonel's men several months earlier and offered payment to file false mineral claims on Apache territory. When Murphy refused to participate in the scheme, he had been threatened and forced to flee the area. His testimony would provide crucial evidence of the conspiracy's scope and premeditation. Murphy also revealed that Thorne had connections to powerful political figures in the territorial capital, including the territorial governor himself. This explained how the colonel had been able to operate with such impunity and corruption so many local officials. The conspiracy reached much higher than Sam had initially realized, involving a network of politicians, businessmen, and corrupt lawmen all working together to steal Native American lands and mineral rights. The two men traveled together toward Silver Mesa, with Murphy's knowledge of backcountry trails proving invaluable in avoiding Thorne's search parties. However, their partnership nearly ended in disaster when they were spotted by a group of bounty hunters near the town of Red Rock. A running gun battle ensued as Sam and Murphy fought their way through a narrow canyon, using the rocky terrain to their advantage against their pursuers. During the firefight, Murphy was wounded in the shoulder, but managed to continue riding as Sam provided covering fire. The bounty hunters were persistent and well-armed, forcing the two men to abandon their horses and continue on foot through terrain too rough for mounted pursuit. They spent 2 days hiding in a series of connected caves, while their enemies searched the area, surviving on rainwater and what little food they had managed to salvage from their saddlebags. When they finally reached Silver Mesa, Sam was relieved to find that Judge Harrison had not been corrupted by Thorne's influence. The judge listened carefully to their testimony and examined the evidence with the thorough attention it deserved. Harrison was particularly interested in the survey documents showing mineral deposits on Apache land, as he had suspected that recent conflicts in the region were motivated by commercial rather than security concerns. However, Judge Harrison delivered sobering news about the political situation. Thorne's allies in the territorial government were already moving to legitimize the seizure of Apache lands, using the alleged murders and subsequent escape as justification for military intervention. A cavalry unit was being dispatched to the reservation with orders to arrest all tribal leaders and relocate the Apache to less valuable territory. The window for legal intervention was rapidly closing. Sam realized that exposing Thorne's conspiracy would require more than just presenting evidence to honest officials. He needed to turn public opinion against the colonel and his allies, which meant getting the truth to newspaper editors and other influential figures who could spread the story beyond the reach of corrupt local authorities. The battle for justice was becoming a race against time as military forces prepared to descend on the innocent Apache people. Judge Harrison agreed to issue warrants for Thorne's arrest, but warned that serving them would be extremely dangerous, given the colonel's network of supporters and hired guns. Sam volunteered to return to Copper Creek and confront Thorne directly, knowing that this might be the only way to prevent the impending tragedy. The judge provided him with official documents and a small group of trusted deputies, but Sam knew that he would be vastly outnumbered when the final confrontation came. As Sam prepared for what might be his last mission, he reflected on the chain of events that had brought him to this point. His chance encounter with 3 condemned Apache women had revealed a conspiracy that threatened not just their lives, but the survival of their entire people. The fight for justice had become personal, reminding him of his own family's tragedy and his determination to prevent others from suffering the same fate. The time for hiding and investigation was over, and the moment for direct action had arrived. Sam returned to Copper Creek with Judge Harrison's warrants and 2 trusted deputies, arriving just as Colonel Thorne was preparing to address a large crowd gathered in the town square. The colonel was using his considerable charisma to rally support for immediate military action against the Apache reservation, painting the escaped women as dangerous criminals who posed an ongoing threat to white settlers. The crowd was responding enthusiastically to his inflammatory rhetoric, their fear and prejudice being expertly manipulated by Thorne's persuasive presentation. Standing at the edge of the crowd, Sam listened as Thorne spun an elaborate web of lies about Apache aggression and the need for decisive action. The colonel claimed that tribal leaders were planning a coordinated uprising that would endanger every family in the territory. He presented himself as the only man brave enough to take the necessary steps to protect innocent civilians from savage violence. The crowd's mood grew increasingly hostile as Thorne's speech reached its climax, with many calling for immediate revenge against the entire Apache tribe. Sam knew that confronting Thorne publicly was extremely dangerous, but it was the only way to expose the truth before the colonel's lies could trigger a massacre. He pushed through the crowd toward the makeshift platform where Thorne was speaking, his hand resting on the official warrants in his coat pocket. The two deputies followed at a distance, ready to provide support but careful not to reveal their presence too early. The element of surprise was their only advantage against Thorne's numerous supporters. When Sam stepped onto the platform, a hush fell over the crowd as people recognized the man they had been told was an Apache sympathizer and criminal. Thorne's face showed a flash of anger and concern before he quickly composed himself and attempted to have Sam removed by his bodyguards. However, Sam's commanding presence and reputation among the townspeople caused enough hesitation that he was able to speak before being silenced. Sam's voice carried clearly across the square as he challenged Thorne's version of events and revealed the evidence of conspiracy and murder. He displayed the survey documents showing mineral deposits on Apache land and explained how the three women had been framed to provide justification for seizing tribal territory. The crowd began to murmur, uncertainly, as Sam's detailed knowledge of the facts contradicted the simple narrative they had been fed by Thorne and his allies. The colonel attempted to discredit Sam by repeating his accusations of Apache sympathy and criminal behavior, but his defensive posture revealed his growing desperation. When Sam produced Judge Harrison's arrest warrants and called for Thorne's surrender, the crowd erupted in confusion and angry shouting. Some townspeople supported Sam's call for justice, while others remained loyal to Thorne and his promises of protection from Indian violence. The situation was rapidly deteriorating toward violence. Sheriff Morrison and several of Thorne's hired gunmen moved to arrest Sam, but the two deputies emerged from the crowd with their own weapons drawn. A tense standoff developed as both sides faced each other with guns ready, while innocent townspeople scrambled for cover. Sam realized that the confrontation could easily become a bloodbath that would serve no one's interests except Thorne's, as chaos would allow the colonel to escape and continue his conspiracy elsewhere. The deadlock was broken by an unexpected arrival. Tom Bradley, the honest jail guard who had helped Sam earlier, appeared with several other townspeople who had grown suspicious of Thorne's activities. Bradley had been conducting his own investigation after the women's escape and had uncovered additional evidence of corruption within the sheriff's department. This show of local support gave Sam the credibility he needed to press his case against Thorne. As more evidence was presented and honest townspeople began to speak up about suspicious activities they had witnessed, the crowd's mood shifted decisively against Thorne and his conspirators. The colonel's carefully constructed narrative crumbled under the weight of testimony from multiple sources, revealing the depth of his deception and criminal activity. Sheriff Morrison, faced with overwhelming evidence of his own corruption, attempted to flee but was quickly captured by Bradley and his supporters. Thorne made a final desperate attempt to escape by taking a hostage from among the crowd, but Sam's quick action prevented further violence. Using skills honed by years of frontier survival, Sam disarmed the colonel and subdued him with minimal bloodshed. The crowd cheered as justice was finally served, though Sam knew that the larger battle for territorial reform was just beginning. Thorne's arrest would expose the network of corruption that had enabled his crimes, leading to investigations of other officials and businessmen. In the aftermath of Thorne's capture, the three Apache women were officially exonerated, and the charges against them dropped. The territorial government, faced with undeniable evidence of the conspiracy, agreed to honor existing treaties and mineral rights belonging to the Apache tribe. The corrupt officials who had enabled Thorne's scheme were removed from office and faced criminal charges of their own. The broader implications of the case led to reforms in how territorial authorities dealt with Native American communities. Sam's role in exposing the conspiracy earned him recognition as a hero, but he remained modest about his contributions to justice. He had simply done what any decent person should do when confronted with corruption and injustice. The Apache women he had saved went on to become advocates for their people's rights, using their experience to educate others about the ongoing struggles faced by Native American communities. Morningstar eventually became a respected leader in negotiations between the Apache and territorial government. The case became a landmark in territorial law, establishing important precedents for protecting Native American rights and preventing the kind of land grab schemes that had been common throughout the frontier period. Sam continued his wandering lifestyle, but now with a sense of purpose that had been missing since his family's tragedy. He had found a way to channel his pain into positive action, helping others avoid the injustices he had experienced. The desert wanderer had become an agent of justice, ensuring that the truth would prevail over corruption and prejudice in the American frontier.